favor of Senate Bill 899?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Jennifer Bruning with St. Luke's Health System, and on behalf of our 10,000 employees in Missouri, I just wanted to reiterate our support for Senate Bill 899.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? Anyone else in favor?
Chairman of the committee, David Hale, Missouri Hospital Association,
Any questions? Thank you. Anyone else in favor of Senate Bill 899? Anyone opposed? Anyone for informational purposes? Senator, I might, being a veterinarian, you know, there's all different levels of placental attachment amongst the different creatures on Earth. And cattle have the most complete placenta. There's 3 layers on both sides. And if those calves don't get mother's milk within 12 hours after birth, that gut tends to close. It's almost impossible to raise them. They die because they don't receive any immunoglobulins across the placental area. And horses are less of a placental attachment, dogs a little less, and then humans are the least. So we do normally get some immunoglobulins. That's why kids that are normal can go on farm and kind of live, but those that don't go to term get very little protection. So I think it is a very, very important thing for survivability. So thank you for bringing it forward.
Thank you for the opportunity to present it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 899. Next up is House Bill 1430. Representative Jones. Speaker Jones, I should say.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Tim Jones, State Representative from the 110th District. I have for your consideration here today a bill that has passed out of the House the last 3 years and it has made its way to the Senate committee for the last 3 years. Hopefully, third time is a charm. Simply put, Mr. Chairman, this is to codify conscience rights for those who are in the healthcare industry, to allow them to exercise their conscience rights without fear of retaliation. The bill has been worked on quite a bit from its original form 3 years ago. We have clearly delineated the definitions section, defining conscience, defining medical professional much more clearly, actually specifying particular medical procedure research and limiting it to those that are in the bill. We allow for a reassignment by the healthcare institution to not be considered retaliatory action. So if someone's exercising their conscience rights and is deciding not to participate in a particular procedure, the institution or location can reassign it without any sort of punishment at all. There is a notice provision, so the person who's going to exercise the conscience rights does have to give reasonable notice. And there is an emergency exception as well, to where the entire bill would not apply in the case of any sort of emergency situation. The bill is meant to be a shield for the worker and not a sword. And given many instances that have occurred recently across our country, it is high time to have, I believe it's codified in our statutes, and it is simply meant to protect the workers. We want to encourage more people to come into the healthcare industry and not have to check their conscience rights.
Very good. Questions?
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if you remember, but you and I had extensive 15-minute long debates on this whenever
We did.
before. As those discussions, I've never questioned your intent. I understand what you're trying to do, but my concern is the unintended consequences and perhaps playing out the application of such a change. You know, there's 22 major religions in the world. Are all 22 of those religions going to be covered in this legislation?
I think they fit within the definition of conscience, which is laid out in the first paragraph.
And so,
It has to be a true religious, moral, and ethical person.
so in the paragraph it says, conscience means sincere and meaningful. Who decides who's sincere and what is meaningful?
You know, if this were ever, if the bill were to put into law and there was ever a case tried, the trier of fact would have to determine if the definition sections actually apply to the person who's seeking a conscience protection.
You know, and I'm not, my goal right now is not to put you on the spot, but I want to just walk through a couple of possible concerns. You know the term jihad? That term is a religious term. It appears 23 times in the Quran. And depending on which scholar interprets it, rather than being an inner or an outer, physical or not struggle, it can mean to be the active religious pursuit of expunging the Christian faith, other faiths, the Judaism. And if you have someone who is an ardent believer in outer physical jihad, and there's 6.2 million Islamic followers in the country, and that's only growing. Is there any concern that you might provide conscientious protections for a religious tenet that would be counterproductive to health, provisions?
I don't believe so, because again, the intent of the bill, and I think it's very clearly explained in the bill is meant to be a shield and not a sword. It's to prevent someone from being forced to participate in an activity. It would not advocate for someone to be taking actual action. It's to prevent the healthcare worker, if the healthcare worker is faced with a situation that violates their conscience, they can say, I don't want to participate in that activity without fear of retaliation.
What about some of the New Age philosophies that have come to the modern world in terms of Scientology? The Christian Science medical belief system believes that sickness is an illusion and that it can only be cured by prayer. If you have a Christian Science, a conversion, maybe they were in the healthcare profession and they converted to Christian Science understanding, and that believe that prayer is the only way and avoids providing the technological advancements that we have available to us to cure an ailment. There's pacifism, and pacifism, if a military soldier comes back from being injured in a conflict that they disagree with and it's against their conscience to provide services, I can see that being an issue. What about, I know that this, I don't want to sound ridiculous, but there are people out there that worship gods that you may find, ridiculous, but yet they have a sincere and meaningful belief. There's Satanism. People worship Lucifer, and they could apply that to this. And all of these, I just think that when we start to go down this path of applying a shield to a religious sector in healthcare, we are opening up a lot of things that you and I may find repugnant or may disagree with, and in those applications, the fairness of with the shield, I believe the restrictions would be inappropriate as well. So if you're going to shield a traditional Judeo-Christian belief system because they don't want to provide birth control, which I think is, or abortion, if you have a Catholic hospital and there's a tenet of that religious belief that they don't want to do that, I think that's where this impetus is coming from. But a lot of unintended consequences that could come out of a piece of legislation that we put in state statute that may cover a lot of things that you and I don't necessarily think should be covered, but then how do you differentiate?
Again, I appreciate all the concerns you brought up, but I don't believe any of those hypotheticals would come into play with the way this bill is narrowly tailored to the intent of the legislation.
Well, thank you.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I wanted to tell you that in my committee, the General Laws Committee, we would never make the Speaker of the House wait until next item. So my apologies on the part of it. Anyway, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, this is something that you've worked on for a number of years, and I think with each iteration and reiteration of this bill, you as well as other people that have kind of helped craft it have done your yeoman's best to try to alleviate many of these concerns, all of these concerns. And so this bill is not necessarily identical to something that we may have seen similar to it from 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I mean, this has been very much an evolutionary type of bill, right?
Absolutely. The bill is, the definitions have been greatly expanded and specified and limited to certain situations. And It's to simply allow a healthcare worker to not have to check their conscience rights at the door. Now, they have to provide reasonable notice. It has to be a sincere conscience belief. There are affirmative defenses in the bill as well. There's an emergency exception. I truly believe the bill would only be used in situations where workers have true conscience objection to something, so they don't have to be forced to participate in an activity that they do not want to. In fact, as you know, there are a couple of healthcare providers in the House. There are several doctors there, and they testified very much in favor of this bill. They felt that is something they would want to have. They would not want workers not 100% invested in whatever procedure they were participating in. They would rather those workers use this bill to opt out.
Thank you.
Senator Chappelle, no. Yes.
Good morning, Speaker. I just have a couple of questions, and I wanted to know how your bill potentially would interfere or interact with basic capitalistic economic principles.
I don't believe it would really affect them whatsoever.
Okay, because I'm looking at, I know as consumers, we all have choices, and we make a choice based on quality, based on philosophy, based on kinds of service that are provided. And I'm just kind of thinking if someone from my community, and I have a very, in fact, I live in Little Israel, and I have a very Jewish community. And I know if there were just two choices of a medical facility, there was one that adhered to parts of this bill and one that did not, there would be a loser and there would be a winner in my community. And so when I look at page 2 and I look at line 12, for the purposes of this section dealing with discrimination, if you're in, and this is a hypothetical, if there are two facilities, medical facilities in the community like mine that I represent, one adheres to your bill, one does not, and there is a loser, the loser would be the one that adhered to this bill. And it talks about termination, suspension, refusal of staff privileges, loss of career specialty, that an individual who works at the facility, perhaps that would adhere to your bill, because they are not getting any business, they close. So they would be terminated, but it wouldn't be based on discrimination. It would be probably based because they don't get any services from the community that they're in. So that's kind of why I asked the question, how does your bill interact with basic capitalistic economic principles?
Well, I think if you're talking about an institution, I think under our free market system, the institution should be allowed to provide what services it wants to. That's up to the institution. If they choose a wrong location to be in, well, then that's a mistake that is made every day in our society. Businesses succeed, businesses fail, depending on what they decide to do. And so I think it should be up to the business. If you're talking about the business, they should be allowed to participate in whatever activity they want to. This bill is generally geared towards workers.
Yeah, exactly, but I'm just, you know how there's a Walgreens and CVS right across the street from one another, or you have two gas stations at an intersection. We are really good about that in St. Louis County. We'll have two gas stations right across the street, and someone said this somewhere this week, you usually go to the gas station that has cheaper prices in the more services, and won't go to the other one. But if that continues to happen, then there's one gas station that's probably going to close. But if there are two facilities, health facilities in a community like mine, there would be a loser and there would be a winner, just because of our basic principles and our values in our community. And I just wouldn't want existing entities, because of their philosophies, to be damaged in any way. I wouldn't want anyone to lose a job.
Yeah, it's really up to the business entity as to what they want to do. I don't think this will affect that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Yes, I've been part of the discussions on this bill for third year too, and one of the sections on page 2 says a medical professional asserting a right not to participate in specified medical procedures or research shall provide reasonable notice under the circumstances of his or her intent not to participate. That's to protect the employer from just these kinds of things we're talking about.
Exactly.
So, I mean, if the job that's being offered is to do something that the prospective employee cannot do, that wording right there prevents them from ever entering into the contract to begin with. I mean, it's not saying that, that the entity has to hire them, isn't that correct?
That's exactly right, and there's an additional section about if the business activity of the institution is so integral to a part of what they do, a person cannot go in there and just to be disruptive and to invoke the statute. So
Right,
that's
that's
why
right.
it's a sword, not a shield.
Right, so it's on page 4 and it looks like lines 5 through 11.
That's correct, so.
So I think what we've done here is we've achieved a balance, and I think it addresses Senator Holzman's concern. If you are working at a place and you suddenly have a conversion, well then, we have to have these entities providing good medical care for our patients. And so this just says, give us reasonable notice. So I guess the court would have to decide what's reasonable. But, you know, I think we've taken care of that.
Do you think that it protects Scientology and Christian Science or just other than Christianity, do you think that this language protects those as well?
I think it protects everyone, including them. I think so.
That's Jewish.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Thank you.
Those testify in favor?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Joe Arkwright with Missouri Family Policy Council to support Representative Jones' legislation. Mr. Chairman, issues of personal conscience emerge in the workplace from time to time. In no setting do they occur with greater moral consequence than the healthcare arena. People such as doctors and nurses enter the medical profession to engage in the healing arts, assist, support, to defend human life. And when they are called upon to participate in conduct that is hostile to human life, it's a tremendous moral quandary for them. Mr. Speaker, this issue of healthcare conscience rights for medical employees first was dealt with by the General Assembly back in 1986 when a law was passed that provided those rights with regard to the subject of surgical abortion. Since then, the medical landscape has radically changed. We have seen medical procedures and devices, ethical issues and moral concerns. We now just not only have surgical abortion, we have chemical abortion through abortion-inducing drugs. We have abortifacients that destroy newly developing embryos. We have in the research arena embryonic stem cell research and human cloning. And we have fetal tissue research and trafficking of baby body parts along with it. So what we're trying to do here, Mr. Chairman, is to close the loopholes of the existing law to see that comprehensive protection is provided in more settings. And also, which has not been discussed here a lot, see not just with regard to medical practitioners themselves, but also with regard to medical institutions, that they are not compelled to engage in procedures that violate their religious mission, that violate their core principles. An example of the issues that come into play here occurred just in the last year when attorney generals in both Washington and California tried to coerce Catholic hospitals to perform abortions as part of approvals that were required by the state with regard to mergers of those hospitals with other institutions. Senator Holzman, you raised, I think, some legitimate issues that were very relevant to the original version of this bill. Since then, this bill has been really drawn back to just apply to specific procedures, to specific instances, and ones that I don't think most of the questions that you've raised come into play anymore. The definition of conscience here, that I know people have wrestled with, comes verbatim from a stream of Supreme Court decisions over time about the way they felt conscience should best be defined, and we deferred to the courts that felt to be appropriate on this question. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I'll just say that despite what you may hear from opponents of this legislation, there is nothing new to what you have before you. Regulations on the federal level were developed under the Bush administration that are essentially identical and in fact were much more rigorous and extensive than those that are contained in this proposed statute. Those regulations were the result of 2 years of public comment. So to the suggestion that it is not practical to implement this statute, the hospitals, not only in the state but across the country, already have to do that in advance.
Thank you. Questions of this witness, Senator Wolf?
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. So we've heard in national news and in these debates in Arizona and Kansas about private businesses deciding that they don't want to provide services to same-sex couples. They don't want to do wedding cakes. They don't want to do photography sessions. And there was an effort in Kansas and Arizona to make sure that they weren't compelled to have to do something against their moral positions. Would this in any way, shape, or form provide for a defense against denial of healthcare services to same-sex couples?
Absolutely.
So if you have a moral objection, if your conscience says, my religious tenets believe that homosexuality is a sin and that gay marriage is wrong, I do not want to provide medical services to this individual because of that, and I'm going to refuse to do so. The language of this as written does not give them a reasonable shield in court to say I didn't have to do that.
No, because it has nothing to do, Senator, with who the person is. It has to do with the procedure. It has to do with these specific procedures that are called out in the bill. That's all it applies to.
What?
Now, again, I'll submit to you, because as you realize, I've had a significant amount of involvement in this bill. The way the bill was drafted originally was much more expansive. It was kind of a clarion call on conscience, protections across the board. Now all applies to these specific circumstances.
And I'm sorry, can you point me to the section of the bill where the procedures are outlined of what is and cannot be?
It's on, I'm not sure, it's on page 2, it's number 5 of the definitions, specified medical procedures for research.
What are those procedures though? Are those procedures going to be defined somewhere or listed? Are those procedures going to be ever evolving?
No, they're right here. They're abortion, abuse, and drugs, contraception, etc.
That's on section 5.
It's in parentheses 5, period 5.
Oh, okay, I apologize. Okay, so I'm up here. Okay. Well, I still suggest that now in the instance that you cited earlier about the Attorney General's getting involved, that was related to accepting federal dollars for those institutions, correct? If you're a private hospital and you take no government assistance whatsoever, then the Attorney Generals aren't trying to compel action on your behalf. It's only when it's associated with the allocation of federal money.
Understood, but that runs contrary to other federal laws.
But they chose to take the federal
What they were
money.
attempting to do when including the face even of the federal position.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Senator Shelton.
I understand where you're coming from, and I guess I have the perspective of a woman who trusts her doctor. And it's kind of interesting because I was coming up on the elevator with Senator Lawson earlier, and I told him I support his bill that was so controversial a couple of weeks ago. And I said, well, I talked to my doctor, and if she says that I'm supporting her bill, I'm supporting her bill. So I have a very close relationship with all of my doctors. And that relationship, I trust them. And if there is ever a need, and I have very specific instructions on certain things, like I will never have a male doctor, ever. And if I go for a second opinion, I do discriminate, I do. If I ever have to go for a second opinion, person who is not able to finish that process of whatever it may be because of an obligation, I'm kind of thinking as a patient, you know, why is this person working in this area? You know, I'm afraid that the relationship between a woman and her doctor at some point can, you know, become weakened. And at what point do you want to encourage patients, consumers, to not have full trust in their doctors to carry out the responsibility that they have, or better yet, the oath that they've taken?
Senator, I respect your convictions and in fact, I believe you to be one of the most sincere members of the County Assembly. At the same time, I'm going to say in response to that, I think we need to work to try to ensure here that no games in color. This issue was dealt with even back with the original bill in 1986 when I was here. We're not trying to set up some scenario where people are going to go apply for jobs at working clinics and they turn around the next day and say, I don't believe in coaching. We're trying to make sure, in fact, the way the bill's written now, so we can't go work for a fertility clinic and then turn around and say, I'm opposed to the organization. We're just trying to guarantee that in circumstances where somebody has core religious convictions, not that they're going to block their consumer or patient from having access to procedures and services they desire, but that they simply wait and say, I have to step aside and for somebody else to provide the care. We don't desire to interrupt the doctor-patient relationship. We submit to you that an abortion clinic, typically one doesn't exist. The woman hasn't even seen the doctor until she's on the operating table. But in circumstances here, as this bill has been drafted and drawn, let me say this, Secretary. One of the comments that was made in opposition to this bill in the House was that people have these beliefs that shouldn't be in the healthcare profession. My response to that, Senator, is that much of the healthcare that exists in this country originated because of religious organizations and religious orders, in fact, who on a charitable basis making no money providing this care. To suggest that many of those institutions and organizations who are the root and the core of healthcare in this country shouldn't be engaged in healthcare anymore and should be chased out of the business, to me is a sad rebuke to not just decades, but centuries of medical care.
And I do have to tell you that I understand where you're coming from, because every single day we do have to make moral decisions. Where we go, who we hang out with, the decisions that we make in this body, in this building. And, you know, there's some tough decisions sometimes that individuals have to make. And, you know, I'm one of those people. There are certain things I choose not to do because it is a moral value to me. And I just know that in my relationship with my doctors, especially over the course of the last year, and not in this particular situation, but I trust them. And I don't want to be, and I guess I am the only woman on this committee, but I don't want that to ever be harmed, is that relationship. And so that's my concern. But I understand fully where you're coming from. We make judgments every single day based on our morals and our values and our convictions. So thank you.
So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none. Anyone else testify in favor? And you can do it if you need to for running over. Any questions? Seeing none. In favor? House Bill 1430.
Mr. Chairman of the committee, Kerry Messer on behalf of the Missouri Baptist Convention, would like to go on record supporting legislation. Our medical professionals are not people who go into this work as a default job. They have taken on a career commitment to service. We've talked here about people